So I was raised in West Michigan. Um, my parents were married, all lived in the same house, had one older brother. My mom was an ordained minister. She was in seminary when I was a kid, student pastoring, early childhood, became ordained about 10 years old or so, and became the minister of a small congregation in town. Very liberal upbringing. Clinton was president. My parents were all about Clinton. When I was 10, my mom taught theology and English at a women's Bible school in southern Mexico, and the whole family lived down there. Me, my dad, my brother, my mom. We lived down there for 4.5 months or so when I was 10 years old. And that was a phenomenal experience, very formative. Highly recommend having your kids immersed in a culture other than our own while they're still very young. But that's for another time. Okay. Had to go to church. Really thought I knew what Christ and church and Christianity was all about because I was in it and doing it, and my mom was a pastor, so why wouldn't I know? Memorized John 3:16, helped out with Sunday school and youth group. My brother started not going, and somehow he got let off the hook and didn't have to go, but for some reason I had to keep going even as my faith and questions wavered as a teenager. Had some, kind of typical experiences at youth group and winter and summer youth programs where, a preacher would get everybody all inspired and ask if you wanted to welcome Jesus into your heart, and, did that a couple times, mostly because everyone else was kind of doing it. I got baptized when I was 6, so not as a baby, but as a very young child, just barely old enough to remember, and really had no idea what it was I was doing. It was just super cool to get a bunch of attention and dunk myself in a cooler full of water up in front of the tiny congregation that we church that we went to at the time. In high school, once I started thinking for myself, I declared that I was an agnostic, and how I defined that at that time was that I wasn't necessarily adamant that God did not exist, but that I had no evidence to prove one way or the other. It was this idea that through open-mindedness, I'm just going to be as decent of a human as I can be, and if I happen to live good, well, then I'm going to end up going to heaven, if heaven exists. And if I'm a bad person, well, then I'm going to end up going to hell if hell exists and if that's real. But there's no way to know whether or not any of that is true, so might as well just be a good person for good person's sake. And it certainly was interesting to be an agnostic and challenge other students' viewpoints and be open to listening to all sorts of different religions and traditions. I took that with me into college, had no religious affiliation or tradition or practice in college, but as a young adult who didn't have any house rules anymore, I started picking up idols. Idols are, well, we'll do a whole nother video on idols and what they are. I started having lots of sex, started drinking lots of alcohol, smoked pot for the first time, started smoking a bunch of pot, felt very lost, was very bored with my life. I'm somebody who really enjoys excitement. Let me put it this way. Boredom and things that would seem to be the least stressful environments, like sitting on a couch, reading a book, having a job where you're at a desk, just, proofreading forms, really stable, low stim, safe environments, those are extremely stressful situations for me. Environments where there's high stakes, like someone could die, or something really big and expensive could get destroyed, and there's a sense of urgency, like decisions need to be made and action needs to be taken sooner rather than later, or else worse things will happen. Emergencies, chaos. Those environments that seem stressful, and I think would be stressful to most people, my stress level plummets in those situations. I don't know why. So the mundane nature of college and the studying and the reading and the lack of action to prepare for some other mundane thing far out in the future was stressful for me. I was reading books about fantasy and adventure, and I'm like, okay, why can't life be like this? And some of you relate to that, fire, EMS, military, like there are people who are wired this way, and some of you get it. So anyway, got super depressed, really didn't see a good trajectory for myself in life, felt an emptiness, a hole. So I dropped out of college, came home. At this point, smoking tons of pot, drinking gobs, having all sorts of sexual promiscuity, threesomes, orgies, having a girlfriend at college, cheating on her while I was home. And my brain didn't understand how terrible that was. In my head, it was all appropriate. Like what happened at home versus what happened off at school, those were two separate worlds with their own. I can't explain it because it's idiotic and it doesn't make sense, but it made sense in my head. And looking back through a Christian lens, it was just utterly sinful, and sin brings consequences, most of which are unintended consequences on our lives, and boy, did I have consequences. Ended up doing it with my best friend's girlfriend. He punched me in the face, a whole bunch of social fallout, big mess. But lots of chaos, which relieved my stress. Chaos and action and high stakes, low stress. The mundane, boring, everything the way you would expect it to be, stressful, right? I ended up, at that time, I had a summer job as a camp counselor at a wilderness skills camp. in Vermont, and I had family out that way, and one of the other counselors went to this groovy little college out in Vermont. So I'm like, cool, I'll go to this groovy little college. It was a lot less strenuous, a lot easier than the college I had been going to, so more room to really goof off. Even further away from my parents. Not that they were really strict about my behavior at all, other than you will go to college. Why? Because we did, and we're paying your way, so why wouldn't you? But, you know, in terms of my parents' views on premarital sex, for example, I witnessed them discuss my older brother having his girlfriend over and them sharing a bed in the house, and they were like, well, as long as they're having safe sex, that's fine. So that's the role model that's the parenting that I got. So I moved out to Vermont. I started going to a little teeny college out there, working as a camp counselor. Got more bored. I was studying experiential education at the time. So I had, in all this time, I had gotten my minor in outdoor education within the first year. I had gotten my wilderness first responder medical certification. I had gotten my emergency medical technician license and national registry. So I was a wilderness EMT. I went out to Vermont. I started majoring in adventure education, switched that to a major that I designed for myself, which was a combination of experiential education and therapy, with the idea that, all from a secular viewpoint, mind you, with the idea that the educational process and the therapeutic process are the same process, addressing the same functions in how a human develops and interacts with the world, only the educational process is doing it right the first time, and the therapeutic process is fixing what went wrong over here. So, how it ought to go, repair, damage control. So I was studying courses on education within a very conventional educational system, and I was studying unlearning, student-based learning, progressive educational models, all within a conventional educational system. And mind you, the way my brain worked was very different than most of the other kids who were successfully navigating college. And that was true for elementary school. But anyway, we're getting off into the weeds. So I dropped out of college again. And I decided to just hit the road and educate myself through experience, like my thesis had started to develop into. And I started to lose value in the accredited education and value learning for learning's sake. And so I hitchhiked across the country. And while I hitchhiked across the country, spiritually and religiously, I sort of returned to Christianity, not in studying the Word and seeking truth, but more just leaning on what I had learned as a child. And so my knowledge and understanding of Christ and what Christ taught was very flawed and inaccurate, but I didn't know it was flawed and inaccurate. I thought I knew what Christianity was because I was brought up in it. And so I became devout in a sense. And that really I started to walk out faith. So I had faith that if I was obedient, I had faith that if I listened to what I was being told, and how I would have said it at the time was, if I walk forward in faith, then I will be protected and provided for. So if I pray and I listen to what I'm receiving in prayer and I act on that, then I will be protected and provided for. And that is very true to a degree. Now, mind you, at this time, I believed that in Christian terms, I said, God works in mysterious ways, which I took to mean that no one can really understand the ways in which God works, and therefore no one can really understand God. And I was dabbling in Buddhism and what I claimed Hinduism and Islam and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't really have an understanding of those religions, and I didn't really study those religions, but in theory, I was basically saying, oh yeah, I can talk about the mystery of God to anyone in any language, in any context, through the lens of any religion. And if you look up Baha'i, I don't know how to spell it, I think on Wikipedia you can probably find it, especially if you maybe do voice to text. Anyway, Baha'i is a modern religion, the premise of which is that all the world religions could be likened to an individual in a dark room with a flashlight or with no ability to see at all, feeling and trying to determine what an elephant is, right? But they're only touching one small part of the elephant. So picture a dark room, there's an elephant in there, and there's like 9 different guys in the room, and one of them is feeling the leg, one of them is feeling the tail, one of them is feeling an ear, one of them is feeling a trunk, and they're all trying to decipher what it is they're looking at. And so of course, even though they're all describing the same thing, they're all describing it very differently. Because one is looking at the tail, one's looking at the ear, one's looking at the leg, feeling it, right? And so Baha'i describes the world religions in a similar dynamic, and that is that all of the different world religions are different attempts to explain the same phenomenon. And they're all valid. And of course they would differ, because they're coming from different cultures and different languages. And at the time, I would argue that Allah, the Islamic word for God, meant God. And that God that they're referring to is the same God as the Judeo-Christian God, and is a singular representation of maybe the multiple gods of Hinduism, or what Buddhism might refer to as consciousness. And I was exposed to all sorts of different belief systems and all different perspectives while I was hitchhiking across the country. So I hitchhiked when I was 21, all the way to the West Coast, back and forth across the middle a couple times, all the way back to the bottom of Mexico where I had lived when I was 10 years old. Tried to get into Canada, they wouldn't let me. Mind you, I was living without money at this time too. So I was very much so in the streets, and I thought that I was living like Jesus, right? Jesus said, go forth and do as I have done. And so I'm like, okay, well that means be a homeless dude. And again, there is some real truth to that. And Jesus kept the company, and I wish I had my Bible with me so that I could tell you this, but that's for a different video. Keep the company of those in society who are undesirable, something like that. We'll track that verse down. And so in a lot of ways I did that. The problem was it was very much so not a Jesus only biblical view, not a Jesus only faith. And I believe now that Christ makes that very clear. On my travels, I spent a good amount of time in South Dakota with the Lakota Indians on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. and I don't want to start any fights. Well, okay, that's my fear of man idol cropping up. I absolutely want to start a fight, and that's okay. Back this up a minute. I am not trying to start any fights. That being said, what I'm about to say may ruffle feathers. And if you have a problem with what I say, feel free to drop a comment. Feel free to email me, readingtheword@gmail.com, RIEDING, reading. One of the Lakota words for God, there's Timkashala, which I believe is a synonym for the creator. The other one is Wankantonka, which my understanding that was given to me by the Lakota Indians that I spent time with there on the reservation in South Dakota. Wankantonka means the great mystery. So one of their words for God literally translates to the great mystery. And I used to use that as the core of the gospel that I evangelized at that point in my life. And I want to say definitively here and now, I was absolutely wrong. I think the time and energy that I spent preaching the gospel of Wankantonka, the gospel of the idea that God is an unknowable mystery, the great mystery, and that every religion is an attempt to explain that mystery from a different viewpoint, a different culture, and a different language. I think that is one of my greatest betrayals of the truth. And I have repented for that over and over and over again, and I'm not sure I can repent for that enough. Because the truth is that God is absolutely knowable, and he made sure of it. God is not a mystery. God works in mysterious ways, and his thoughts and his processes are beyond our human comprehension. But he, very much so, revealed himself to us over and over and over and over again. And all of that is documented in the Bible. And you should read the Bible for yourself. You should not take my word for it. You should not take your pastor's word for it. You should not depend on any other human being to be the representative to you of what the truth of God is. You should read the Bible for yourself, and God will make himself known to you. So after whoring across the country and getting thoroughly addicted and controlled by my relationship with pot, marijuana, and even tobacco. I was totally addicted to cigarettes for a time, but that was, my parents had raised me to be disgusted by that, and so the moment at which I realized I was addicted to cigarettes, I forced myself to quit by quarantining with a friend that didn't smoke. That was an easy idol to kick. Most idols are not easy to kick. So I came home a number of times. Those details aren't important. lived in Detroit for a couple months, squatting in a burnt out house with some other people my age who were just totally living in sin and having sex with whomever. Had my run-in with polyamory at that point. So non-monogamous, polygamy. Basically, the idea of polyamory is that you love who you love. Like, sexuality goes out the window. Everything's okay. Which is not true. And I was sleeping with a girl and living with a girl who I thought I would be cool with her sleeping with other guys, and then she did sleep with another guy, and I woke up from my nap on the couch and went to the side of the bed that I had been sleeping on for a month, and there was another dude in my spot, and I realized it wasn't my spot, and it wasn't my girl, and it wasn't my house, and if you're living in polyamory and you want to talk, get a hold of me. I'll listen. We'll talk. I got no problem. And I've got no problem with you. I've got no disrespect for you. But living in polyamory is not respectful of you. I got my head stomped on while I was in Detroit. I watched my friends get mugged, and I stood by and let it happen. So I was a coward. Talk about fear of man. I was not brave. I did not rescue. I did not fight for anybody else. I was sitting in a living room and the door got kicked in, and I was with a handful of my friends, and the door got kicked in and a couple big guys came in and they started confronting one of the guys sitting on the couch, and you could tell they had kind of egged each other on, and this guy who was fronting to my friend on the couch just started wailing on him right in front of me. Right in front of me and a couple other. And me and the other guys who were not getting our asses beat, we got up and shuffled behind the guy and ran out the door and abandoned our buddy to just get beat, potentially to death. He did not die, he survived, but that's irrelevant. So that's who I was. And who I thought I was somebody who was going to save the world. If you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, you would have met me at that time and you would have agreed that I was a flaming liberal. I never dyed my hair. But that's redeeming. Kidding. Okay. I don't have a problem with you if you dye your hair. You do what you want. So I thought I was going to save the world. So one of the ideas that I came up with to save the world was I was going to ride my bike around the state, dumpster diving. And I'm still a big fan of dumpster diving, and if you ever want my thoughts on dumpster diving, you ask, and I'll do a whole video on dumpster diving. I could write a book about dumpster diving, but that is not this video. So I started this project called Gift Cycle, where I rode my bike hauling a burley trailer, a child trailer behind my bicycle, and I would ride 60, 70 miles a day, and I would dumpster dive, and I would go through dumpsters, and I would find all this stuff that was still perfectly good. Yes, there is a ton of stuff that people throw away and that businesses throw away that are still totally perfectly good and still sellable, and that's another video. So if you want that video, let me know in the comments and I will make that video. And I blogged about it and put it up on Facebook, and it blew up. Within a couple weeks I met somebody who had heard about me before I even got there, and it was a lot of fun, and still at this point officially moneyless. on the back of my bike, I had a sign that said free food and stuff, just ask, with this Gift Cycle logo that I had created. And I was trying to do waste stream awareness, and I was trying to save the planet because this was wasteful, and I was starting to develop this ethic against capitalism and against money and really against plastic. Oh my gosh, plastic is evil. Plastic is evil. It's filling up the ocean, man. We gotta stop using plastic immediately. Greta Thunberg and I were like this. Okay, I didn't actually know her, or I don't even think she was on the scene quite yet, but that's who I was, okay? Why do I tell you this? Because one of the most clear times that I was used to answer a prayer was during this point in my life. So I was completely lost. I was a total lost sheep. I was completely living in sin. I was all about sex. I was all about drugs. Nothing super hard. I mean, okay, I did shrooms and did acid once, and anyway, we'll get there. So I was in Traverse City, Michigan, right there, in the pinky, and I was dumpster diving my way around town, and I was behind a Jets Pizza. I was behind a thrift store, but the thrift store was right next to a Jets Pizza. Thrift stores are great places to dumpster dive, or at least they were back then. And I'm rifling through the dumpster, and this guy comes out of the Jets Pizza, and he sees my bike, and he reads the sign, free food and stuff, just ask, and he says, hey, I've got a hot pizza here. It's the third one that hasn't gotten picked up today. The staff is full. We can't eat anymore. I was gonna throw it out. It's perfectly good. Do you want it? I said, sure, totally. And I put it in the trailer, and I looked at my little map, and I rode to the next thrift store. I was trying to hit every thrift store in the city that day. And as I'm riding up to the next thrift store, this thrift store was having this all-day outdoor flea market kind of event. And I pull into the parking lot, and one of the ladies working the event reads the sign on the back of my bike trailer, free food and stuff, just ask. And she laughs and says, hey, you wouldn't happen to have a pizza in there, would you? And without skipping a beat, I turn and I lean into my trailer, and I pull out this hot Jets Pizza, which if you've never had Jets Pizza, it's pretty darn good pizza. And I say something hokey like, I hope you like pepperoni or whatever. And I hand her this pizza that's fresh out of the oven. And she starts crying. And I'm like, what's up? And she said, I had forgotten that we were having this all-day event today, and I didn't know I was going to be working this long, and I didn't pack a lunch, and I literally just prayed to God to please just deliver a pizza about 2 minutes before you pulled into the driveway. And she's saying this in tears.